Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is Wednesday, March 4, 2026.
And there is an absolute mountain of data to get through today.
There really is. Because this isn't, we aren't just looking at a regional skirmish today. This is a pivotal moment in modern history.
Absolutely.
We are actively tracking a rapidly escalating multi-front war in the Middle East. And let me be completely clear about the stakes right at the top for you listening today. This conflict directly threatens to shatter the fragile global economy you rely on.
Right, your gas prices, your retirement accounts.
Exactly. It threatens to upend United States military hegemony once and for all, and it is actively rewriting the rigid rules of asymmetric warfare right before our eyes.
Yeah, and that is exactly the mission for today's deep dive. We need to look far past the sanitized official press briefings coming out of Washington and Tel Aviv.
Because the briefings, frankly, aren't telling the whole story.
Not even close. To do this, we aren't just reading carefully crafted public relations statements. We have compiled a massive stack of raw intelligence. We are talking about encrypted military intercepts,
High-resolution satellite imagery,
real-time global market futures, frontline telecasts, and data from automated targeting systems. We're using all of this to figure out what is actually happening on the ground. We are going to exhaustively examine the severe military logistics failures.
the unprecedented economic shockwaves.
Right, and the very real geopolitical panic that is currently spreading like wildfire from the Persian Gulf all the way to the capitals of Europe.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to give you the unvarnished truth that other networks are missing.
Let's get into it.
To start, we really have to look at the illusion of decapitation versus the harsh reality of the battlefield. We're beginning with the on-the-ground factual reality that the kinetic conflict between the United States and Israel on one side and Iran on the other.
Right.
Now, for some context, following the distinct precedent of the 12-day war that took place back in June of 2025,
Which set the stage for all of this.
it did. Following that, the U.S. and Israel launched a truly massive coordinated bombing campaign. And the explicitly stated goal of this campaign was the complete decapitation of Iranian leadership.
Which is a classic Western military doctrine.
Exactly. Let me give you the hard data points we are tracking right now on the intel stack. We have the confirmed assassination of the Ayatollah on the very first day of this conflict.
Day one.
Day one. Furthermore, we had the complete flattening of a specific, highly secure building in the holy city of Qom.
And we should explain why that building matters.
Yeah, if you are wondering why one specific building in Qom matters so much, it is because that building was currently housing the 88-member Assembly of Experts.
The council that picks the successor?
Exactly. This is the very council tasked with the constitutional duty of electing a new replacement Ayatollah. The building was completely leveled. On paper, to a Western military planner, that looks like a strategic checkmate.
I have to step in here, though. I have to push back heavily on the actual effectiveness of this specific military strategy.
You don't think it worked?
The data we are pulling from those frontline telecasts tells an entirely different story. According to the rigorous analysis provided by Greg Stoker, he's a former U.S. Army Ranger, and the geopolitical analyst known as Loki, decapitation strikes simply do not work against highly decentralized, ideologically driven military apparatuses.
Because they're built to survive it?
Exactly. There is a deep misunderstanding of the adversary here. According to the military analysis of Colonel Douglas Macgregor, there is this persistent, fundamentally flawed assumption floating around Western command centers. They treat Iran like it's some sort of backward, fragile, tribal society where if you kill the chief, the whole tribe just magically disintegrates and goes home.
And that's a fatal miscalculation.
It's completely fatal because it entirely ignores the history. Iran has literally been preparing for this exact war with the United States for 50 straight years. Ever since the Islamic Revolution.
They assume a first strike is coming.
You don't spend half a century assuming your top leaders will magically survive an American first strike. They have utilized deep subterranean bunker complexes. We're talking about cities built into the very bedrock of mountains.
Massive underground infrastructure.
And entirely decentralized command structures specifically designed to render these exact types of decapitation strikes strategically useless. The local commanders on the ground already have their orders. They don't need a phone call from Qom to launch their arsenals.
And look, the hard numbers absolutely back up your point regarding their endurance and their pre-planned response. Just look at the sheer, overwhelming volume of Iran's immediate retaliation.
Operation True Promise 4?
Right. We are currently tracking Operation True Promise 4, and we are already in its 15th distinct wave of launches.
15 wave.
15. They are utilizing advanced hypersonic missiles alongside thousands of loitering munitions and drones. And they aren't just hitting the state of Israel. They are hitting heavily fortified United States military bases spread across the entire Gulf region.
They didn't pause to mourn the Ayatollah.
No, they immediately escalated the volume of fire. Which brings us to the core issue of how this war is actually being fought.
What's fascinating here is the absolute democratization of warfare happening in real time.
Democratization, right.
Yeah. If you are listening to this and wondering how a heavily sanctioned nation can maintain a barrage like this against the U.S. military, we have to talk about the severe cost asymmetry happening in the skies right now.
The financial drain.
It's unbelievable. The United States and its allies are firing Patriot interceptor missiles that cost approximately $4 million each.
$4 million for one Patriot.
Yes. And for higher altitude threats, they are utilizing Thiad interceptors, terminal high-altitude area defense. Those run upward of $44 million per single shot.
And what exactly are they shooting down with those?
Iranian Shahed drones that cost roughly $20,000 to manufacture.
Let's just break that down for a second, because those numbers are staggering. You were talking about firing a $44 million asset to take down a $20,000 piece of fiberglass with a moped engine strapped to it.
It is the equivalent of crashing a brand new Ferrari into a shopping cart just to get the shopping cart out of your driveway.
That's a great analogy.
I mean, yes, you might win that specific collision. The shopping cart is destroyed. But you are going to go bankrupt doing it 1,000 times a day. It does not take a degree in advanced economics to realize that you cannot win a war of attrition when your defensive umbrella costs thousands of times more than the enemy's offensive capabilities.
It's just basic, brutal mathematics.
Exactly.
I hear that, and the math is terrifying. But we also have to acknowledge the claims coming directly from official military briefings.
Pentagon's narrative.
Right. The Pentagon and the IDF are stating quite firmly that Israel's Iron Dome and the various U.S. layered defense systems are, in fact, successfully intercepting a massive percentage of these incoming threats. There is a strong, persistent narrative being broadcast that the skies are being held secure and the bases are safe.
I will counter that official narrative directly with the hard satellite imagery detailed by analyst Alexander Mercouris.
The visual data.
The visual data is completely undeniable. You cannot spin a crater.
What are the satellites showing?
We are seeing massive structural damage to the United States' Fifth Fleet facilities located in Bahrain. A major, highly advanced radar system there was completely destroyed.
And that's a heavily defended facility.
Heavily defended. We are also seeing significant impact craters and destroyed hangars at the massive Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar.
Which is the nerve center for U.S. air operations in the region.
Exactly. And we are seeing major damage to vital logistical bases in Kuwait. These are not intercept successes, no matter what the briefings claim. These are catastrophic breaches of the defensive perimeter.
The shield is failing.
Iran is fundamentally proving that it can penetrate the most sophisticated, obscenely expensive air defense nets in human history, using highly economical, mass-produced munitions.
So the defensive umbrella has holes in it. And the U.S. is fundamentally struggling to protect its own regional headquarters.
Right.
If you are looking at this logically, that instantly raises a glaring problem. If the bases are getting hit, where is the rapid response? Where is the cavalry?
That is the million-dollar question.
Let's lay out the hard, unforgiving data provided by military analysts Captain Matthew Ho and Scott Ritter. Because the reality is the logistics crisis exposes what analysts are now calling the naked empire.
The naked empire. I like that term.
It's accurate. The United States military is fundamentally structurally overextended. Let me give you the exact fleet numbers.
Lay them out.
Out of 30 amphibious warfare ships and 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in the entire U.S. naval fleet, the United States currently has zero, I repeat that for the listener, zero Marine Expeditionary Units actively positioned in the Middle East to respond to this crisis.
Zero MEUs. Let's make sure the audience understands the gravity of that. For those who aren't steeped in military jargon, an MEU is not just a handful of soldiers on a boat.
No, it's a massive force.
An MEU is essentially a floating, self-contained city of war. It contains over 2,000 Marines, armor, artillery, Harrier jets, F-35s, and its own dedicated logistics train. It is America's premier break glass in case of emergency 9/11 force.
So if the Middle East is engulfed in a multi-front war, where exactly are those vital assets?
Where are they?
According to the maritime tracking data and Captain Ho's analysis, the only active, fully deployable Marine Expeditionary Unit was actually moved from the Mediterranean over to the Caribbean.
The Caribbean.
Yes, why? For operations involving Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro.
You have got to be kidding.
No. So you have a massive historic war erupting in the Persian Gulf, and the primary rapid response emergency force of the United States Marines is thousands of miles away, dealing with South American geopolitics.
It's a massive strategic blunder.
And consequently, to plug these gaping, dangerous holes in the Middle East, the United States is actively, frantically stripping bare its Indo-Pacific defenses. We are tracking confirmed reports that the Pentagon is pulling vital Kierod and Patriot missile batteries out of South Korea and Japan.
Assets that are explicitly meant to deter North Korea and China.
Exactly. Rushing them onto cargo planes to send them to the Middle East.
Which is a logistical nightmare that completely exposes the deep systemic rot of a purely financialized defense industry.
Financialized defense industry. Explain that.
Well, if we look at the exhaustive supply chain analysis provided by Colonel Daniel Davis and Greg Stoker, they point out an almost unbelievable reality about how the West manufactures its weapons. The United States currently has exactly one single factory. One factory located in Poland that is actively producing 155 millimeter artillery shells at any real scale.
In Poland, not even in the U.S.
Think about that. The foundation of modern ground combat relies on one facility in Eastern Europe. The American military-industrial base has been painstakingly optimized over the last 40 years for one specific thing.
Maximizing corporate profit.
Precisely. They want to build the $44 million missile, not the dumb artillery shell. They focused on highly complex, hyper-expensive boutique weapon systems that look great at defense contractor trade shows, rather than maintaining the rugged, unglamorous mass production capabilities required for prolonged high-intensity warfare.
It's all about the profit margin per unit.
It is. They built a military exclusively tailored to fight localized, low-tech insurgencies and conduct surgical special operations against non-state actors. They absolutely did not build a military designed to endure a grinding, months-long war of attrition against a near-peer adversary like Iran.
Because Iran possesses a massive, indigenous, geographically shielded manufacturing base. And the data shows it is not just the manufacturing that is failing. It is the readiness of the equipment itself, and honestly, the psychological state of the personnel operating it.
Morale is collapsing.
Let me bring up this shocking operational failure we tracked from the naval telecasts, the USS Gerald R. Ford.
The crown jewel.
It's the absolute crown jewel of the American aircraft carrier fleet. A $13 billion floating fortress. It literally had to dock and suspend operations because 80% of its internal plumbing completely failed.
80%.
Now, you might think, okay, a mechanical glitch, a design flaw. But the reported cause is something internal military analysts are dubbing Gen Z fragging.
Gen Z fragging. That is a term that should send a chill down the spine of every commander at the Pentagon.
It really should. The reports indicate that sailors were intentionally flushing uniform shirts, heavy debris, and tools down the toilets to actively sabotage the ship's deployment.
Intentional sabotage.
Yes. Now, if you've ever had a terrible roommate who passive-aggressively breaks things so they don't have to do chores, imagine that exact same psychological dynamic. But on a nuclear-powered warship, in a combat zone.
It's terrifying.
When your multi-billion-dollar vessel is effectively defeated by its own sanitation system because the crew fundamentally refuses to fight and wants to go home, you have a monumental, catastrophic crisis of morale.
And that profound crisis of readiness on the water is further compounded by unmitigated, highly classified disasters in the air. We must discuss the intercepted reports detailed by investigative journalists John Helmer and Greg Stoker regarding the downing of 3 United States F-15 air superiority fighter jets.
3 F-15s went down over Kuwaiti airspace.
Yes. Now, the fog of war is thick here. The exact details are heavily contested in the telecasts. Some signals intelligence suggests they were shot down by Russian-made S-300 anti-aircraft batteries operated by Allied regional forces.
It's a friendly fight.
A horrific, catastrophic friendly fire incident due to failed communication protocols. But other analysts reviewing the same intercepts suggest Iranian surface-to-air capabilities have drastically improved and they successfully reached them.
But logically, regardless of whose missile actually hit those jets, the net result is exactly the same.
Exactly. The overarching geopolitical impact is identical. The United States is bleeding highly advanced, utterly irreplaceable resources at an unsustainable rate.
They can't just build another F-15 tomorrow.
No. The U.S. is essentially proving to be a paper tiger on the global stage. It is demonstrably unable to flawlessly protect its own sovereign military assets, its own headquarters, and its own jets, let alone extend a secure, impenetrable defensive umbrella over its regional allies who rely entirely on American protection.
Which brings us to the panic. Because if you are a Gulf ally watching this, say Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, and you realize the mighty United States defensive umbrella is currently full of holes.
And your protector's aircraft carrier is docked because of sabotaged plumbing.
Right. Absolute panic is your only logical response. Let's look at what is happening with the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC nations. They are currently caught directly in the deadly crossfire of this escalating war.
Who exactly are we talking about here?
We are talking about Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and even Oman. And Oman typically prides itself on acting as a neutral diplomatic mediator.
They usually stay out of it.
Usually. But according to the detailed briefings provided by Ambassador Chas Freeman, ballistic missiles and suicide drones are actively striking these sovereign territories for one simple, unavoidable reason. They host United States military bases.
Iran isn't targeting the host nations.
No, they are targeting the U.S. military footprint within those borders.
But that distinction doesn't matter to the citizens living next to those bases. The internal domestic dynamics of these Gulf states are incredibly fragile. Take Bahrain as the primary example.
What's the demographic breakdown there?
You have a Sunni royal family aggressively ruling over a local population that is roughly 80% Shia. As Iranian strikes consistently hit the United States Fifth Fleet headquarters situated in their country, the local population is not rallying around the royal family. They are using the chaos to revolt.
They see weakness.
Massive, violent domestic protests are erupting in the streets of the capital, Manama. And strategically, a vital piece of infrastructure was destroyed. The bridge linking Bahrain directly to Saudi Arabia was bombed and utterly destroyed.
And that wasn't a random target.
Not at all. The explicit tactical intent of that strike was to physically sever the land route to prevent Saudi Arabian troop reinforcements from crossing over the water.
To stop them from quelling the protests.
Exactly as they did during the Arab Spring years ago. The internal societal stability of these monarchies is cracking violently under the immense pressure of this regional conflict.
And the leadership of those monarchies is completely visibly panicking. We are looking at a fundamental geopolitical earthquake happening right now.
It's a realignment.
A total realignment. According to the detailed tracking by analysts Alex Christoforou and Alexander Berkouris, these Gulf leaders, including the incredibly influential Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, MBS, along with the leaders of the UAE and Qatar, they are completely bypassing Washington, D.C. They aren't calling the White House for a solution. They aren't asking the State Department for a diplomatic lifeline.
Who are they calling?
They are picking up the phone and directly calling Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow.
Wow.
Desperately begging him to utilize his relationship with Tehran to broker an off-ramp and stop the Iranian bombardment of their territories.
Which signifies the total humiliating collapse of Western diplomatic authority in a region they have dominated since the end of the Second World War.
It's unprecedented.
It is. And it is not just the Gulf states experiencing this extreme cognitive dissonance and scrambling for cover. It is ripping violently through the traditional European alliances as well. Look at the intense, highly public debate currently raging between British political figures Rory Stewart and Alastair Campbell regarding the United Kingdom's exact role in this mess.
Yes, the situation with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is a perfect, almost tragicomic case study in this geopolitical whiplash. Let's trace the timeline here because it genuinely gives you a whiplash.
Let's hear it.
Initially, Starmer stood up in front of Parliament. He explicitly stated that according to the strict binding legal advice of his Attorney General Richard Hermer, the initial United States and Israeli decapitation strikes against Iran lacked any valid legal basis under international law.
He called them illegal.
He did. Therefore, Starmer definitively and publicly refused to allow the UK to participate in any offensive operations whatsoever. He drew a hard line in the sand.
A line that lasted exactly 24 hours.
Exactly 24 hours. Literally the very next day, under immense, crushing diplomatic and economic pressure from the United States, he entirely reversed his course.
Folded completely.
He returned to the podium and announced that the United States would, in fact, be permitted to use sovereign British territory. specifically the highly strategic airbase at Diego Garcia down in the Indian Ocean.
And RAF Akrotiri?
Yes, located in Cyprus, permitted for what he very carefully legally termed defensive operations.
The impossible, almost schizophrenic bind the UK has placed itself in is staggering. By allowing U.S. heavy bombers and logistics aircraft to launch and operate from British sovereign territory, even if you stamp the word defense on the paperwork, the UK instantly blurs the line of neutrality in the eyes of the adversary.
You can't host bombers and claim you're neutral.
You can't. They are desperately trying to diplomatically protect upwards of 150,000 British expatriates currently living, working, and raising families across the Gulf region. But simultaneously, they're taking overt military actions that paint a massive, glowing target on their own backs for direct Iranian retaliation.
And the retaliation is already threatening them.
It isn't theoretical. We have already seen intercepts indicating Iranian drones are actively targeting the immediate vicinity of those British bases in Cyprus.
And this isn't just the UK scrambling to figure out its identity in this new world. In Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is aggressively, frantically reversing years of established foreign policy regarding military deployments.
Europe is fracturing.
While in France, President Emmanuel Macron just held a massive, highly publicized, almost theatrical event to announce a dramatic expansion of France's independent nuclear shield, citing the absolute irrationality and unpredictability of the current conflict.
And while the West fragments and argues over definitions of defense, the East consolidates its power. We have concrete reports from analysts like Loki and John Helmer that both China and Russia are actively, materially aiding the Iranian military effort.
Material aid? What kind of aid?
They are doing it in a way that fundamentally neutralizes American technological advantages. They aren't just sending bullets. They are providing highly encrypted, real-time targeting data directly via their proprietary Beidou and GLONASS satellite constellations.
The Chinese and Russian satellite networks.
Yes. This is giving the Iranian military early, accurate warnings of United States Air Force movements across the globe. And it is allowing Iranian automated targeting systems to completely bypass American electronic warfare and GPS jamming countermeasures.
So if you're wondering how the $20,000 drone is managing to hit the heavily defended base, that is exactly how. The drone isn't flying blind. It has the combined satellite architecture of two global superpowers guiding it.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire global architecture is shifting beneath our feet. And nothing reflects that structural shift faster and more violently than the global financial markets.
The markets are reacting.
If you are listening to this on your commute or sitting at your desk checking your retirement portfolio, this next section is where the geopolitical theory violently crashes into your everyday life. This brings us to the economic shockwave, specifically regarding crude oil and the hegemony of the United States dollar.
Let's unpack the hard market data, because it is absolutely staggering. The moment the true scale of this conflict became apparent.
When they realized it wasn't just a 3-day skirmish?
Right. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged by 900 points in a single trading session. Crude oil immediately spiked by a massive 11%, jumping instantly to between $74 and $77 a barrel.
And it's climbing.
And the global futures markets are completely panicking. They are pricing in a massive risk premium and predicting a leap to 90 or even well past $100 a barrel by the end of this current week. But the most terrifying data point, the one that is keeping economists awake at night, is the situation in the Strait of Hormuz.
Let's make sure everyone understands the geography here. The Strait of Hormuz is not just some random body of water. It is the central jugular vein of the globalized carbon economy.
A vital choke point.
We are talking about a narrow waterway, only 21 miles wide at its absolute narrowest point, with shipping lanes that are only 2 miles wide in either direction. And through that tiny, vulnerable choke point flows 20 million barrels of oil every single day.
20 million barrels.
That is fully 1/5 of the entire global oil supply.
And right now, according to multiple maritime tracking telecasts and shipping manifests, the strait is experiencing what the industry is calling a soft closure.
Soft closure, meaning insurance is pulling out.
Exactly. Major international shipping conglomerates and the massive global insurance underwriters operating out of London have completely halted all operations and pulled all coverage for any commercial vessels attempting to traverse that area. If you can't insure the cargo, you can't sail the ship.
Which means the supply is effectively choked.
As a direct consequence of this soft closure, Qatar has officially publicly suspended its production and exportation of liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
That is massive.
This is a move that is going to absolutely devastate European energy grids which became entirely reliant on Qatari LNG after pivoting violently away from Russian gas 2 years ago.
What is genuinely frightening here is the long-term macroeconomic analysis provided by veteran economists Michael Hudson and Peter Schiff.
Yeah.
They were looking at these shipping numbers, looking at the insurance freeze, and drawing a terrifying, mathematically sound conclusion.
What's the projection?
If this disruption in the Strait of Hormuz lasts for months, which, as we discussed, Iranian officials insist their military is fully prepared to endure, we are no longer looking at a localized regional recession or a temporary spike at the gas pump.
We're looking at a depression.
We are looking directly down the barrel of a global economic depression driven by an insurmountable structural energy crisis. Factories will shut down, supply chains will freeze, and the cost of every single physical good that requires transportation will skyrocket.
I hear that, but there is a counter-argument actively present in the short-term market data that we really need to address here.
Let's hear it.
A strong United States dollar, fueled by global investors fleeing in pure panic to the perceived absolute safety of U.S. Treasury bonds during a major global crisis, actually helps the United States government finance this incredibly expensive war in the short term. The dollar index has rallied significantly over the last few days. Wall Street is looking at that and saying, see? The dollar is king. We can afford this.
Wait, hold on. I have to jump in there.
Go ahead.
Yes, the dollar is rallying right this second, but that short-term bump is a complete mirage. I must strongly push back on that short-term interpretation because it completely ignores the structural, devastating reality facing the global south.
How does it affect them?
As economist Michael Hudson explicitly points out, the artificially inflated strength of the U.S. dollar, combined directly with the rapidly rising cost of dollar-denominated crude oil, places every developing nation on Earth in an impossible, fatal dilemma.
Walk us through the math of that dilemma.
If you are a developing nation, your national debt is likely denominated in U.S. dollars, and you have to buy your oil in U.S. dollars. So when the dollar spikes and oil spikes simultaneously, your national budget is suddenly annihilated.
You can't afford both.
The nations of the global south will literally be forced to choose between two catastrophic options. They can either continue to drain their coffers to pay their crushing dollar-denominated sovereign debts to the IMF and Western bondholders to maintain their credit rating, or they can take what little foreign exchange reserves they have left and use it to aggressively subsidize their own domestic energy grids to prevent their populations from literally starving in the dark. You cannot do both.
So if they have to choose between paying Wall Street or keeping the lights on in their own cities, what does this all mean for the future of the currency?
It means they will choose to keep the lights on. They will default. It means that this specific war is the ultimate, unavoidable catalyst for the complete destruction of United States dollar hegemony.
The end of the petrodollar.
When these dozens of nations inevitably default on their Western debts because they were forced to buy overpriced oil, they will be forced by sheer economic survival to accelerate their timeline for total de-dollarization.
Where do they go?
They will aggressively pivot to join the alternative non-dollar financial architectures currently being built and expanded by the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This war is not just destroying physical military bases in the sands of the Middle East. It is actively, structurally destroying the core economic foundation of the American empire.
And as that economic reality sets in, the battle to control the domestic narrative is completely falling apart. Let's dig into the information war, the increasingly desperate manufacture of domestic consent, and the deeply alarming fanatic ideology driving this conflict from the inside.
The messaging coming out of Washington right now is not just contradictory, it genuinely borders on the surreal. The people in charge of explaining this war cannot keep their story straight from one sentence to the next.
We tracked a recent press briefing featuring Pete Hegseth. He's currently operating under the resurrected, highly aggressive title of the Secretary of War.
Secretary of War.
Yes. In the exact same breath, during the same minute of the telecast, he adamantly, angrily claimed that the United States absolutely did not start this war and was merely responding to aggression.
Okay.
But then he immediately pivoted. without skipping a single beat, to gleefully boasting about how the massive U.S. military machine gifted death to the Iranian leadership, and he proudly confirmed that they had, in fact, executed a preemptive regime change operation.
This is an astonishing logical paradox.
You cannot simultaneously claim to be a passive victim of aggression while boasting about successfully executing a preemptive assassination.
And he is not the only high-level official trapped in this rhetorical maze of their own making. Senator Marco Rubio attempted to justify the entire military campaign on a recent broadcast. He explicitly claimed the United States was fundamentally forced to strike Iran preemptively.
For what reason?
Because, according to Rubio's incredibly convoluted logic, Israel was already planning to strike Iran regardless of what the United States wanted or advised. And, Rubio argues, the inevitable massive Iranian retaliation to that hypothetical Israeli strike would have put United States troops stationed in the region at immense risk.
So they struck first to protect troops from a future strike Israel hadn't done yet.
Therefore, to protect the troops from the fallout of an attack Israel hadn't even launched yet, the United States had to attack Iran first.
It is an open admission that United States foreign policy and the deployment of its military force is entirely captive to Israeli military adventurism. The tail is openly wagging the dog.
Precisely. And then you have the commander-in-chief, you have President Donald Trump issuing public statements that directly, embarrassingly contradict the Pentagon's own frantic, highly classified logistics reports.
The logistics we just talked about.
Right. While the quartermasters and analysts are screaming about the dangerous depletion of THAAD and Patriot missiles in the empty armories, Trump is loudly insisting on public broadcasts that the United States possesses virtually unlimited munitions.
Unlimited.
And that these wars can be fought successfully forever without any strain on the homeland. It is a complete, total detachment from the physical, mathematical reality of military procurement and industrial capacity.
But the contradictory press briefings are actually the least concerning part of this narrative puzzle. If we pull back the curtain on the military itself, we find a deeply alarming, highly ideological element driving these decisions. This was uncovered by investigative researchers Scott Horton and Greg Stoker.
This part is truly frightening.
This isn't just a cynical debate about geopolitics, securing shipping lanes, or controlling oil anymore. According to the data, a messianic, literal end times ideology is aggressively being pushed at the absolute highest command levels of the United States military.
This is where the analysis moves from geopolitical strategy into the realm of ideological fanaticism. And it is vital that the audience understands this shift.
The data on this is chilling. Independent watchdog groups have currently cataloged over 110 formal documented complaints. These are originating from more than 30 separate United States military installations across the globe.
From the troops themselves.
From veteran, non-commissioned officers, the sergeants who actually run the military day to day. They're officially reporting that their unit commanders, the high-ranking officers, are holding mandatory briefings telling their troops that this war with Iran is not about national security or protecting allies.
What are they telling them?
They are explicitly telling these young men and women that this war is part of God's plan to ignite the Middle East, trigger the biblical Armageddon, and usher in the return of Jesus Christ.
Sometimes ideology.
They are explicitly telling heavily armed, highly trained American soldiers that they are participating in a holy apocalyptic crusade.
This raises an incredibly important, terrifying question. What happens to the rigid chain of command, the rules of engagement, and the adherence to international law when the officers issuing targeting orders believe they are fulfilling apocalyptic biblical prophecy?
You can't reason with that.
It completely fundamentally erodes the rational, secular, rule-based foundation of the military. You cannot negotiate a ceasefire or a rational off-ramp with a commander who genuinely believes peace is a violation of God's will, and this extreme ideological fanaticism is inherently tied to a massive coordinated effort by the state to cover up the true bloody cost of this conflict from the American public.
Let's look at that casualty cover-up because the numbers simply do not align. The United States Central Command, CENTCOM, currently admits to exactly 6 American military fatalities resulting from the massive drone and missile strikes on the bases in Kuwait and Bahrain.
6 fatalities.
6. However, Iranian state broadcasting channels, publicly utilizing their own satellite battle damage assessments, are openly claiming upwards of 650 United States casualties.
That is a massive discrepancy.
Now, let's be fair. While the Iranian number may very well be inflated wartime propaganda designed to boost their own morale, independent military analysts point to a very specific, glaring anomaly. There is a complete lack of traditional communications blackouts at these bases.
Which is standard operating procedure.
Usually, when mass casualties occur, the military instantly cuts all internet and phone lines from the base to notify families properly. The fact that this hasn't happened, despite the visual destruction of the bases, is highly suspicious. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, and it is being aggressively managed and suppressed.
And that aggressive management of the truth extends directly into the domestic sphere, where the state apparatus is utilizing raw fear to manufacture consent for a war nobody asked for. We must examine the horrifying mass shooting that just occurred on 6th Street in Austin, Texas.
According to the initial police reports, the shooter was a Senegalese naturalized citizen. It was a horrific tragedy. But immediately, before the bodies were even cleared, before any exhaustive multi-agency investigation could be completed or evidence analyzed,
The narrative was already set.
the event was rapidly, aggressively framed by high-level federal officials as a coordinated retaliatory terror attack directly linked to the assassination of the Iranian Ayatollah.
Analysts like Greg Stoker are heavily criticizing this rapid-fire narrative. He points to the highly politicized, unusually swift nature of the FBI's public statements. In any normal investigation, the FBI takes weeks to determine a definitive motive.
Here they had it in hours.
They had an international geopolitical motive assigned within hours. Stoker suggests it bears all the historical hallmarks of a domestic psychological operation, deliberately designed to terrify the American public into abandoning their skepticism and supporting a foreign war out of sheer panic for their own safety.
So if you step back and look at the contradictory briefings, the end times rhetoric, the suppressed casualty numbers, and the instant terror narratives. So what does this all mean for the state of the country?
It signifies a deeply desperate, flailing attempt by the political and military establishment to forcefully manufacture domestic consent for a war that the American public absolutely fundamentally rejects.
The public doesn't want it.
The hard polling data is undeniable. The latest aggregates show a massive, historic 80 to 20% spread entirely against this military adventurism. The public has lived through 2 decades of quagmires in Iraq and Afghanistan. They do not want this, they do not want to pay for it, and they do not want to fight it.
And that profound rejection is not just happening in civilian polls. It is actively, visibly manifesting within the ranks of the military itself. We are currently tracking a massive, completely unprecedented surge in active duty United States service members flooding the GI rights hotline.
What are they calling for?
These are soldiers, sailors, and airmen desperately applying for formal, conscientious objector status to legally refuse deployment to this specific theater. They are reading the situation, looking at the broken plumbing on their carriers, looking at the ideology of their commanders and saying, I will not participate in this. The internal friction within the American war machine is reaching a critical boiling point.
Which, logically and tragically, brings us to the final, most terrifying phase of this deep dive. When conventional victory is impossible and domestic support is collapsing, the state becomes incredibly dangerous. We have to define the end game, and we have to look directly at the looming apocalyptic shadow of the Samson option.
Let's look at the rigidly stated positions of both sides. Donald Trump has completely, categorically, and publicly refused any avenue for diplomatic negotiations.
He says it's too late.
He has aggressively declared on national telecasts that it is simply too late for talks, operating under the highly disputed, factually incorrect claim that the Iranian military apparatus has already been entirely obliterated by American air power.
And what is Iran saying?
Conversely, high-ranking Iranian officials, such as Ali Larijani, are calmly, methodically stating on their own public telecasts that the Islamic Republic is fully, logistically, and psychologically prepared for a grueling 6-month minimum war of asymmetric attrition. They are practically inviting the U.S. to try and outlast them.
This raises an important question, perhaps the single most critical question of this entire analysis, and one that no official in Washington or Tel Aviv seems able to answer. What exactly are the United States' and Israel's defined victory conditions? What does winning look like?
They haven't defined it.
Because mathematically, strategically, and logistically, there are no achievable conditions clearly defined. The stated ostensible goals broadcast to the public, such as fully disarming the massive Hezbollah network embedded in Lebanon, or completely destroying Iran's vast, deeply subterranean nuclear and ballistic missile manufacturing infrastructure via conventional aerial bombing, are statistically and physically impossible.
Let's explain why it's physically impossible, because people hear bunker buster and assume it can destroy anything. The conventional bunker-busting munitions currently in the U.S. arsenal simply cannot penetrate the sheer depths at which Iran has built these specific facilities.
Under mountains.
We're talking about complexes bored deep into the size of solid granite mountains, reinforced with decades of poured concrete. You could drop conventional bombs on that mountain for a month, and you would only scratch the paint on the blast doors.
Exactly.
So if conventional victory is a mathematical and physical impossibility, and diplomacy is entirely off the table, we have to debate the absolute worst-case scenario. According to the grim, exhaustive analysis provided by Professor Stephen Starr, a leading global expert on nuclear conflict and escalation, we are rapidly approaching a catastrophic, unprecedented threshold.
The intersection we are looking at is where failing conventional defenses meet existential panic. Let's trace the timeline of failure. As the finite stockpiles of conventional interceptors, the Iron Dome missiles, the Patriots, the THAADs we talked about earlier, are inevitably exhausted by the sheer, unending volume of cheap Iranian drones and hypersonics, the state of Israel will suddenly find itself without a shield.
The shield will break.
When the shield breaks, Israel faces a rapidly deteriorating, truly existential security threat. At that exact moment, Professor Starr explicitly introduces the terrifying, incredibly real possibility of the Samson option.
Let's break that concept down for the listener, because it sounds like something out of a Cold War thriller, but it is deeply real policy. If you recall the biblical story of Samson, he was chained to the pillars of the Philistine temple. In his final act, rather than be defeated, he pushed the pillars apart, bringing the entire temple down, crushing his enemies and killing himself in the process.
The ultimate final act.
Militarily, the Samson option refers to Israel's unacknowledged, highly classified, but universally understood doctrine of resorting to its indigenous, highly potent tactical nuclear weapons arsenal if the state ever faces imminent destruction. It is the ultimate, if we go down, everyone goes down with us contingency plan.
And the conditions are aligning for it.
If the conventional shield breaks and the ballistic missiles begin raining down unhindered on population centers in Tel Aviv and Haifa, the deeply ideological hardliners currently operating within the Israeli command structure may genuinely view a preemptive tactical nuclear strike on Iranian soil as their one and only remaining strategic move to survive.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the execution of the Samson option wouldn't just be a regional tragedy. It would permanently, instantly alter the entire trajectory of human history.
It would break the taboo.
The detonation of a nuclear weapon in anger, for the first time since 1945, would instantly, irrevocably render Israel an absolute pariah state on the global stage. Even its staunchest defenders in Europe would have to cut all ties.
It couldn't politically defend it.
Furthermore, it would force an immediate, total, and permanent diplomatic and military break with the United States. No American political administration, regardless of party affiliation or previous alliances, could politically survive associating with or defending a preemptive nuclear strike.
It would lead to global conflict.
It would shatter the fragile, psychological nuclear taboo that has miraculously held the world together since the end of the Second World War, virtually guaranteeing a cascading, uncontrollable global conflict that would immediately draw in Russia, China, and the European powers.
Okay, let's take a breath and unpack everything we've covered today. We have thrown a massive amount of complex data, logistics, and geopolitical theory at you. But we need to synthesize this into the one vital, overriding takeaway that you need to remember as you watch the news for the rest of the week.
The core truth.
This is the truth that cuts through the noise. This is not just a contained regional conflict over disputed borders or specific natural resources. It is the ultimate, violently kinetic stress test of the entire global order. We are bearing witness to a monumental historical paradigm shift.
The math of empire is failing.
The era of precision, high-cost, hyper-technological empire building, the very foundation of American military dominance for the last 40 years, is currently being violently, systematically dismantled by the sheer, brutal, unforgiving mathematics of cheap, democratized drone warfare and asymmetric endurance.
The American paper tiger has finally met a swarm of hornets.
And the exorbitant cost of maintaining the defense has finally permanently exceeded the capacity of the empire to pay for it.
And as we close out this analysis, I want to leave you with one chilling final thought to mull over as you watch these specific events unfold in the coming days. We have documented in exhaustive detail how the United States military is quietly, desperately cannibalizing its own vital missile defenses in the Indo-Pacific region.
Pulling from Japan and South Korea.
They are literally stripping defensive assets from those allies, leaving them vulnerable just to desperately survive a few short weeks of conflict in the Middle East. So ask yourself this question and consider the geopolitical implications.
What happens next?
What happens to the fragile global balance of power if another major global superpower, say one located in Asia, watches this American logistical collapse in real time, looks at the strategic map, and decides that tomorrow is the absolute perfect day to test those newly empty, completely undefended waters?
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.